So we are trying to make the program more interactive. So you can also, in between your lecture, you can interact with the participants. And after your lecture, as Dr. Sanjeev is telling, they have already circulated some, quizzes or some questions, and they will like to have the questions from the participants also. So the importance of the topics and the program is well known to all of you, and the eminent speaker is having, vast experience, and he is a very well-known pathologist in the professional field. I am sure that the participants will be benefited, and it will generate more interest in the subject for our young participants, our young students. And we will be looking forward to have, kind of physical workshop at our campus once we reopen, so that the kind of theoretical background and whatever knowledge is possible through virtual mode, that is we are trying to do through these webinars. And the resource persons are very, very responsive, and they are forthcoming, showing a lot of enthusiasm, and I am personally workshop where they can give the hands-on experience to the participants. So we'll be looking forward, Dr. Gupta, to have you at Patna and spend some time on the campus after we return back to normal. I hope this happens sooner than later, and things become better for the whole world. Today, again, I was seeing that in Melbourne, they have noticed some 26 cases in Australia, and a snap lockdown has been declared from today night. So these things will keep on recurring, and the problem, the enemy will not go very easily. We all have to be very cautious to prevent the spread and take care of each one of us. First and foremost, your own care, own precautions. So with this note, I again welcome Dr. Gupta and wish you all the best.
Thank you,
have nice deliberations and interaction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir, for your encouraging words. I would also request to join you, sir, during our valedictory function for the concluding remarks, sir. It will be around 4:30, sir.
Okay, I will let you know.
Thank you, sir. Now I feel extremely pleased to introduce you to our today's speaker, who is also my mentor, Dr. M.K. Gupta, sir. He is an eminent pathologist. He is currently professor and head in the Department of Pathology at Bihar Veterinary College, and also serving as DRI cum Dean PGS for Birsa Agriculture University, Ranchi, Jharkhand. He has a vast experience of teaching for about more than 30 years. His area of interest is clinical pathology, poultry pathology, and toxicopathology. But personally, I know that he is pioneer worker in clinical pathology of Jharkhand state. He is instrumental in popularizing veterinary clinical pathology and motivating we veterinarians to go for laboratory diagnosis to rule out any disease suspicion. He has single-handedly handled almost all the samples being received from different parts of the Jharkhand, and he has established a modern diagnostic lab which is at par with the human, some best labs of human laboratory, sure. He is also recipient of ICR, JRF, and HRF fellowship. To his credit is also some best research papers, about 80 research papers in different journals of repute. Let me also tell you that he was qualified for ARS, but he finally prepared and preferred to remain in the academia. And also in the year 2020, he has organized a conference of Indian Veterinary Pathological Congress, where he was highly appreciated by Dr. B.N. Tripathi sir, and he was awarded Best Pathologist award also, sir. So in the today topic, he will deliver on the hemoprotozoans. This monsoon and post monsoons, which favor the most of this ectoparasite, which are responsible for transmitting these hemoprotozoans. So this topic is very pertinent, and handing over to Dr. Gupta sir for his deliberation. Sir, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sanjeev, for giving such a nice introduction myself. And at the outset, I would like to extend my gratitude to Most Honorable Vice Chancellor, Sir Dr. Rameshwar Singh sir, for giving me this opportunity to participate in such a wonderful interaction. I am also extremely thankful to Dr. Rajendra Kumar, Director Research, BASU. Sir has been so nice, and we had a very nice interaction. I extend my gratitude to Director Research and for giving me this wonderful opportunity to interact with such a wide range of participants from all over the country. My thanks to Coordinator Dr. Sanjeev Kumar and all my young colleagues from Department of Pathology in Bihar Veterinary College. They are a very dynamic lot and doing a lot of good things for the benefit and upliftment of the subject. And it is a privilege for me to speak to and interact with such a good audience. And my good wishes to all the participants also to have a good interaction. Thank you. And with these few words, I really thank the organizers and of course, no doubt, Vice Chancellor sir and DR sir, for giving me a topic which is very close to my heart and it has got immense practical application in the field of veterinary.
Sir, Dean sir has also joined us, sir. So I also welcome our respected Dean, Bihar Veterinary College, sir.
My presentation is visible, Dr. Sanjeev?
No, sir.
Screen share कर लेंगे sir.
Sir, in the bottom, there will be share screen icon, sir. In the bottom, there will be icon share screen. You click on this, sir. In the meantime, I will request and invite our participant for maximum interaction at the end of the lecture. So prepare your list of questions that you want to ask from our experts. Dr. Panda may also join us. Dr. Barashar may also join us. So we will have almost 3 external experts during the interactive session.
You can have the questions in the chat box. Invite the questions in the chat box, Sanjeev.
So during the lecture, please put your questions in the chat box.
Sanjeev sir, you may inform me about questionnaire also. Questionnaire of all the lecture session. You may kindly inform.
Yeah.
Sir, as per your instruction, I have prepared questionnaire on the Google Doc form.
डॉक्टर संजीव आप म्यूट हैं.
Sir, as per your instruction, I have prepared the questionnaire and passed to the participants and received their response for the last 3 lecture. For today lecture, I will be preparing the questionnaire and again passing to the participants in the evening.
Fine,
So
fine.
sir has joined and
Yeah.
your screen is very visible, sir.
Is it okay now?
Yes, sir, it is okay.
So I extend my gratitude to Dean Bihar Veterinary College also for giving me this chance to interact with people. And now I would like to start my presentation, which is on diagnosing hematoprotozoan diseases in cattle. Now, this topic probably has been dealt many times, but today I am going to discuss it from the field point of view, the most practical point of view, the problems which I have faced and the lacunae which I have faced and the things which I want to actually see a change in the practicing field of veterinary pathology. So, and the other thing is that when you have to put a nail in a wood, you don't do it just by hammering once. It has to be hammered, repeated, so that it go into the place. So if we are discussing these kind of topic again and again, it means that it has got great significance in the applied pathology and applied veterinary science. And therefore, I am really thankful to Dean Bihar Veterinary College, Director Research, Basu, and Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, for giving me this opportunity to discuss a very important topic with the learned participants of this NAHEP program. I am extremely thankful to Coordinator NAHEP also for giving me this real good opportunity to interact and provide me such a wonderful platform to discuss my ideas and thought processes. Unless we work together as a team, unless we share our views and our ideas, things are not going to spread. And the end users, you can say, or the poor farmers who actually are looking towards us for their solutions of their problems. To provide that, we have to act in a most authentic, in a most scientific, and in a most ethical manner. And for that, we are preparing ourselves. And the young generation is very sensitive, they are very intelligent, and I hope they are going to take up the challenge in the most befitting manner and provide all the solutions to the society in the best possible manner. The way our science is growing, definitely, the
डॉक्टर संजीव, शेयरिंग आप कर सकते हैं अगर कोई प्रॉब्लम हो रही है सर को, तो यू कैन टेक द कॉपी ऑफ द लेक्चर एंड स्टार्ट शेयरिंग, दैट विल बी हेल्पफुल आई थिंक सो। लग रहा है कुछ कनेक्टिविटी इशू है।
Sir, please unmute, sir.
Is it okay?
Yes, sir.
So
स्लाइड शेयरिंग नहीं हो
my
रहा सर।
screen,
स्लाइड इज नॉट
slide.
विजिबल, शेयरिंग हैज बीन स्टॉप्ड।
शेयरिंग बंद हो गया है।
Sir, you can even mail the PPT to me so that I can share it, sir.
Okay.
Uh,
Let me see. Is it visible now?
आ गया सर।
हाँ आ गया।
Yes, sir.
Okay, sir. So, so this is one of the most important aspect of veterinary science these days. Hemoprotozoan constitutes one of the most important group of disease processes in dairy industry. And we are going to discuss the different aspects of diagnosing hemoprotozoan disease in cattle, about which I will start my discussion with giving a brief review of what dairy industry stands today, where dairy industry of India stands today. It all started in 1970. Till then, it was backyard farming type of thing. But then, with the advent of Operation Flood, there was a dramatic change in the entire scenario. In 1970, there was 20 million ton milk capacity of our nation annually, whereas today in 2020, India is producing milk in excess of 192 million ton, which makes it definitely the highest milk producing nation in the world. And we can see that in 50 years, 10 times more milk production is taking place in our country. India has today 12 million dairy farmers, and there are more than 250 dairy plants in our country. And India is producing in excess of 20 million liters of milk a day. So the credit definitely goes to the legendary Padma Vibhushan Dr. Varghese Kurian sir, who was the architect of White Revolution, and the cooperative system of dairying was introduced by him, which became extremely successful. And today, India is producing 192.4 million liters of milk annually, and sorry, 192.49 million cattle population is there in India, whereas buffalo population is much less. It is 109.85 million, and annual milk production of our country stands at 192.0 million ton. When we see the top 10 milk producing states of India, we will find that Uttar Pradesh is ranked first with producing 26 million ton annually, and followed by Rajasthan, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, and Andhra Pradesh, Punjab, who are producing in excess of 10 million tons. And then there is Maharashtra, Haryana, Bihar is there, and Tamil Nadu, nearing 10 million ton, and the progress is still on. So these are the standing of some of the higher milk producing states of our country. My state, Jharkhand, is ranked 17th in the milk production at national level. I don't take it as a negative way, because it shows that there is much more, scope for development in our state. Total livestock population of India is 536 million as per the report of NDDB. And the per capita milk consumption is paltry. It is so less, 390 grams per day. If we compare with our state, other states of our country, Punjab is excelling with 1.18 liter per day. Haryana per capita milk consumption is 1.087 liter per day. Rajasthan, Gujarat, Himachal Pradesh, they have got a good amount of per capita milk consumption. But here lies the irony of the whole situation. We are number one in milk production, whereas milk availability in India is at 84.5 gram per capita per year. And we are placed 99th in the world. So here lies the reality. Though we are producing so much of milk that we are ranked first, still there is a long way to go before miles to go before we sleep. We can say, as our profession is directly connected to it, and we are almost wholly responsible for the betterment of this particular industry, animal husbandry industry, dairy industry. So immense work has to be done to bring a production level which can provide sufficient milk to our population. So that was the success story of increasing the milk production 10 times in a span of 50 years. And that was mostly done by crossbreeding program. But there was a flip side. There is a flip side of white revolution also. This was, of course, as I have told, that crossbreeding program has increased. Crossbreeding program has increased milk production, but it has also increased disease susceptibility also, because all the imported breed that we brought were extremely susceptible to disease conditions because of the non-conducive environment of our country, and the Holstein Friesian or Jersey, mostly coming from the temperate climate, were not very much resistant to the disease which are prevalent in our country. So there is these increased disease susceptibility are the cause of major economic loss, which is due to, number one, infectious disease conditions like FMD and other viral and bacterial diseases, which are responsible for economic loss of in excess of 14,000 crore rupees. Infertility is causing a damage of 12,000 crore rupees. Hemoprotozoan disease, which is the topic of discussion today, is leading to a loss of 11,000 crore rupees to the nation. Mastitis, 8,000 crore rupees. Then there is parasitic infestation, metabolic diseases. So huge loss goes into the dairy industry because of the disease process. And the disease is more prevalent in the crossbred animals. Their population is growing in our country. So there is economic loss due to, you can say, crossbreeding program, and it is definitely the flip side of the white revolution. So when we talk about diagnosis, then the clinical feature or the clinical finding also constitute one of the aspect of diagnosis. A professional who is working in the field, who is actually doing the work, pathologists are always considered as doctors behind curtain. They are providing the inputs. Their offices are mostly situated in the basement of the hospitals, but they provide important clues to the physicians. So hemoprotozoan and hemorrhagic disease, when we talk about diagnosis, we must know the clinical features of these disease conditions also in the most uncertain manner, so that we can prescribe or advise for the tests required for their diagnosis. These organisms constitutes group of pathogens which are causing major economic loss to the industry. You see, we talk about FMD. There are so many programs being launched by our nation for control of FMD. The loss due to FMD is almost the same as is due to hemoprotozoan and hemorrhagic disease. So what I want to emphasize is that there is a need for addressing control of hemoprotozoan and hemorrhagic diseases as sincerely as we talk about brucellosis and FMD. So in brief, I have listed the clinical signs which accompany these hemoprotozoan and hemorrhagic disease, like theileriosis, which is accompanied with high fever, generalized lymphadenitis. Patient suffers from anemia, ulcerative ebomyositis, hemoglobinuria, in severe cases, and death. Definitely in theileriosis, the cytokine storm plays important role in the fatalities. Then we have babesiosis, which is accompanied with high fever, hemoglobinuria or red water disease. Then the animal suffers from splenomegaly, the enlargement of spleen, hemolytic jaundice it suffers from, there is anemia and death. Whereas trypanosomosis shows the animal suffering from trypanosomosis exhibits high fever, nervous manifestations, blind staggers, hypoglycemia, tendency to lapse into chronicity, and death. And anaplasmosis is accompanied with high fever, development of severe anemia in a very short period. The anemia develops fastest in anaplasmosis, as I have recorded or experienced. And of course, icteric urine is there, and the feces becomes yellowish, and the animal dies if it is not being provided enough therapeutic support. So these hemoprotozoan diseases and hemorrhageal diseases, if you see carefully, the common factor is high fever. There are certainly specific clinical signs for each and individual hemoprotozoan and hemorrhageal diseases. But what is common is high fever. In all the conditions, animal suffers from high fever. And in the beginning, all these the specific changes like lymphadenitis in case of theileriosis or hemoglobinuria in case of babesiosis or blind staggers in case of trypanosomiasis, these are not there in the initial phases. So when it becomes overt, when it becomes extremely clinical, then full-blown case, then these changes will be there. So initially, if high fever is there, and if we do not control the disease in the initial stages, the production will go down. There is danger to the loss of loss of life also. So the earlier we diagnose, the lesser will be the production loss and economic loss. So our aim is to diagnose as early as possible, and in that, the clinical sign constitute very important, plays very important role about which we should have a very clear understanding. And the culprits which I was talking about definitely is theileria, then there is babesiosis, then there is trypanosomosis, and the only hemorrhageal disease, the anaplasmosis. I have shown you the picture. Of course, you must have seen it several times. But these are all, very overt disease conditions. And the real expertise lies when you diagnose these disease conditions when they are present in low infection rate, and to identify the organism in a no uncertain manner and give clear diagnosis, then only you get a you are more helpful to the physician. Some historical fact about these pathogens. Now, these pathogens were reported in the late 19th century or in early 20th century. Is same with all the other pathogens. Most of the pathogens have been recorded or reported for the first time in this era only. The great scientists were there. In 1878, Lewis reported first mammalian trypanosoma in rats. The distinguishing fact is that it was reported from India. In 1880, Evans reported Trypanosoma evansi. In 1888, Babes reported Babesia bovis. 1893, Babesia bigemina described by Smith and Kilbourne. 1898, Robert Koch, the great Robert Koch, observed Theileria parva. And the same great scientist reported Koch's blue bodies in 1905. So you see, it's more than 125 years the disease has been reported, and we are still struggling to control it in our country or globally. So these hemoprotozoan and hemorrhageal diseases are prevalent all over our country. Some of the references I have mentioned here, and you will see that there is variation in the incidence of these diseases in different states, like West Bengal 34.84%. Bihar has reported 74.4% incidence of hemoprotozoan diseases, which means that 3 out of 4 animals are suffering from this disease condition, which is a very significant fact. In our Jharkhand, it is 39.44%. What I want to show you is that states like Rajasthan, Gujarat, and Telangana, they have low percentage of hemoprotozoan disease incidence. In my opinion, probably they have got a better diagnostic facility and they diagnose it early and they can control the disease conditions in a better way. So then, of course, we can see that the incidence of these disease conditions vary in different states of our country. Like in Bihar, sorry, in Gujarat, the thalaria incidence is highest, whereas in Telangana, it is babesiosis is the highest. In Rajasthan, incidence of anaplasmosis is highest. In Telangana, again, trypanosoma infection is higher. So it is not that in the entire nation, same proportion of different hemoprotozoan and rickettsial disease incidence is taking place. So it becomes very important to actually scan or screen the presence of different pathogens in the particular state and accordingly prepare their strategy to control these pathogens in the particular state. That can only be done by proper diagnosis of the disease condition. And if we see the season-wise incidence, we can see that mostly the disease incidence has taken place, the highest disease incidence has taken place in summer or rainy season of these pathogens. So these pathogens are responsible for heavy economic losses to the dairy industry. If we break up the losses, we see that Thaliariosis alone itself is responsible for a loss of in excess of 8,000 crore rupees. Babesiosis is much less, 551 crore rupees. Trypanosomosis 1.2 crore rupees, 1,200 crore rupees, and anaplasmosis 814 crore rupees, as per the reports. And the total loss due to hemoprotozoan diseases comes to around 11,000 crore rupees. In my opinion, the data is significantly understated. It is not giving the true picture since mostly hemoprotozoan diseases remain undiagnosed as against FMD or mastitis, which can be easily diagnosed clinically. So here we have to make effort. A positive effort is needed to give a confirmatory diagnosis. Only then we can judge the entirety of the loss situation. What are the reasons for economic loss due to hemoprotozoan disease and hemorickettsial diseases? The main reason is the mortality, the death that takes place due to such infections. Then losses are due to production loss. The milk production goes down. The pregnant animal may abort. That contributes to loss. They may develop infertility. And the expenditure on treatment and quarantine and surveillance and on doctor's fee, all these are the reasons due to which the owner suffers economic losses due to hemoprotozoan and hemorickettsial disease. Why it is difficult to control the disease? Why we are facing this difficulty? Why we have to discuss the different diagnostic approaches? So factors affecting control of hemoprotozoan and hemorickettsial diseases are that it is difficult to control because these diseases are vector-borne in nature, and unless we control the vectors, the disease can't be controlled. And controlling vector again itself is a Herculean task. Then the mutational changes that takes place in the pathogen makes it difficult to overcome therapeutically or by way of vaccination. Then, of course, the indiscriminate use of medicine because we are not knowing what we are treating. And if we do not undertake diagnostic process, we will be arbitrarily using medicine. So there is a lot of loss or we fail in properly controlling the disease process. There is lack of awareness and carelessness. People are not ready to call doctors, or they depend too much on quacks for the treatment. So that can also lead to difficulty in controlling the organisms. Negligence in preventive measures, poor knowledge of biosecurity measures, and lack of diagnostic facilities. This last one is very important. There is huge loss of a huge lack of diagnostic facilities in the field condition. So these are the factors, in my opinion, which are affecting control of hemoprotozoan and hemorickettsial diseases. These are the vectors we know how difficult it is to control, and not only on the surface of the body, they can stay, they can remain infective for even 4 years. So they are huge threat to the dairy industry, because they are responsible for so many vector-borne diseases. What is the current scenario? What is happening in the field or in our country? So the current scenario is that disease diagnosis in over almost 99%, or say 95, whatever you may say, it's a huge percentage of cases of the disease cases are diagnosed. The diagnosis is based simply on clinical signs, and diagnostic tests are not taken up, and doctors are simply as a presumptive diagnosis, they treat the patients. Then there is general reluctance and apathy towards laboratory investigations, which may be due to difficult working conditions. I agree. It is very difficult to actually, because in medical science, patients come to the doctor. In veterinary science, doctors has to go to the patient. So it is a bit tedious. Then there is minimal use of diagnostic aids. We all know that what is the situation in the field condition and how much diagnostic facilities are there in the field condition. There is rampant use of over-the-counter medication. There is no legislative control over selling of the medicine. So because they are being given to non-technical persons, this leads to difficulty in control of the pathogen as well as in the treatment of the disease condition. There is highly deficient infrastructure. We know what is happening in the field condition, though there are on paper laboratory being set up by the government, but they are not functional. Then of course the economical factor. Our farmers are very poor. We know in Ranchi itself, when we go for vaccination drive, they are not ready to spare 2 rupees for vaccination. Such is the poor state of the condition. So if we ask them to shell out 1400 rupees for treatment of theileriosis, they are helpless. They can't do it. So economical factors are also playing important role in difficulty in control of the disease process in our country. So what is those negativities I have discussed, but there is positive aspect also, particularly for hemoprotozoan and hemorickettsial diseases. And that is, due to availability of effective medicine, early diagnosis and treatment can minimize the loss considerably. Here lies the factor. Here lies the important situation. If we can diagnose it early, the effective medicines are available. So theileriosis can be treated with the help of buparvacone or oxy-LA, we all know. Babesiosis can be treated with the help of diaminoxine diacetylate or imidacarb. Trypanosomosis, antracite, trichome, trilexine, etc. Anaplasmosis, oxytetracycline LA or oxytetracycline. Of course, along with required supportive therapy, we can actually treat the animal if we can diagnose it early. So what are the options we have for the diagnosis of hemoprotozoan diseases? The first option that we have is molecular diagnosis, which is becoming popular day by day. It is gaining in significance. The mainstay of this approach is polymerase chain reaction, PCR we call it. We all know due to COVID now every layman also knows about PCR and RT-PCR. It's a complex procedure, no doubt about it. Needs isolation of DNA, RNA, appropriate primer. We need enzyme and nucleotide to set in motion polymerase chain reaction, which will amplify short specific DNA sequences to identify target DNA in test samples. So though it is costly, but it is highly specific and sensitive technique. And World Organization for Animal Health, OIE, has stated that, has declared that it is 1,000 times more sensitive than peripheral blood smear examination. So nobody can challenge their importance. It is definitely very important. But the only drawback is that it can be performed only in specialized laboratories by technical people. It cannot be made available in the grassroots level. It has got limited availability, no doubt about it. Even in Ranchi, we are not having one. They are extremely expensive. So the cost factor in veterinary science or in dairy science is very important. We just cannot overlook the cost factor also. So it is good for institutional use, but for the grassroots level, for the village level, we need to have other methods also. So that after molecular diagnostic approach, we have immunodiagnostic methods like ELISA test, lateral flow immunochromatography can be used, indirect fluorescent antibody tests are applied, complement fixation tests have been developed as antigen or antibody detection assay in the bloodstream. And now antigen detecting commercial test kits are not freely available in them. Here lies the problem. Though the tests have been, documented, have been researched, but what is their practical availability? I mean, doing research and finding out it is good, but it has to make available to the common people at an affordable price. Only then we can prove useful to the masses. Then the problem lies in detection of antibody through immunodiagnostic tests does not necessarily equate to active infection. We all know that antibody survives or stays in the circulation for a pretty long period of time. So even if any test which detects antibody may give false positive reaction, so the sensitivity and may be variable, specificity may be variable. Then point of use or rapid diagnostic test kits available commercially are selected and caters to the need of canine, feline, and avian disease diagnosis. They are not for bovine, mostly not for bovine. ELISA test has been developed for trypanosomiasis, which is effective in detecting antigen or antibody of T. evensi, and most ELISA tests are designed for processing sample batches in diagnostic lab. So again, at grassroots level, their availability is minimal or almost non-existent. So batches में जब बड़े batches में if you want to explore the आप zero diagnosis करना चाहते हैं, zero prevalence देखना चाहते हैं, then it is good to have these tests in the laboratory and you can bring large number of samples and treat it. But for practical purposes, for clinicians, these tests are almost non-existent. Some more immunodiagnostic tests which can help in the diagnosis of hemoprotozoan and rickettsial diseases are direct or indirect hemagglutination test, complement fixation test, Western blot test, capillary tube agglutination test. Now, capillary tube agglutination test has been claimed to be specific for Babesia bigemina and show no cross-reaction with other species. The test has been reported suitable for field diagnosis. This is what I am saying. Yes, it is reported for suitable for field diagnosis, but it is not available to the field veterinarians. So whatever we have, they remain in the laboratories. They do not go out to the field veterinarians, and the field veterinarians has to depend mostly on clinical findings for diagnosis. So they are doing whatever is possible. Practicing or treating animal on the basis of presumptive diagnosis. It is not their fault because we are not providing enough diagnostic facilities. If we provide diagnostic facilities, there is no reason why they are not going to use it. So the mindset has to change, the thinking process has to change, and then only the scenario will change. We will discuss again on this point. limitations of immunodiagnostic tests. What I was talking about. These tests are somewhat expensive. I will show in the next slide. They are not universally standardized and show discrepant results for different laboratories. The sensitivities and the specificities are not up to the mark. No external proficiency testing program is being done. It is difficult to obtain purified antigen of Is it okay now? Okay.
Yes, sir. Okay.
Okay. So immunodiagnostic tests, they have wide range of cross-reactivity, lacks simplicity, sensitivity, and repeatability. These are no simple problems. These are the problems which make them difficult to use in the field circumstances. Because in field, the field veterinarian will need definitive diagnosis, not that there are chances of error. There should not be chances of error in the report of the pathology test. So we need to have a test procedure which gives a correct reading in shortest possible turnover time. Nobody can wait for long for getting test results. Not going ahead.
It's fine, sir. Go ahead, please.
नहीं वो तो ठीक है, ये मेरे स्क्रीन पे आगे नहीं बढ़ा. हाँ, okay. So what I was telling that veterinary immunodiagnostics are very expensive. We have to depend on biotech companies to get these diagnostic tests which are available at exorbitant price. You can see swine fever 20 tests 30,000 33,000 rupees, then ND virus 45,000 rupees, feline FIV virus 15,000, canine distemper 15,000. So these are all very expensive test kits. Even the rapid diagnostic test kits for dog also, they are costing in excess of 600 700 rupees per test. So this is a major constraint in applying veterinary immunodiagnostics. And second is the unavailability of these tests, particularly for the dairy sector. So we are left with blood smear examination. Not that we don't want PCR to be there or immunodiagnostic to be there, but they are not really available under the field circumstances. And what is available is blood smear examination, which is considered as the gold standard test for diagnosing hemoprotozoan and hemorickettsial diseases, and it has multiple advantages. Let me tell you. Of course, I will again repeat that OIE has said that PCR is 1,000 times more effective than peripheral blood smear examination. So if we are detecting through peripheral blood smear examination, we are losing out on many possible subclinical infection which could possibly be diagnosed with the help of PCR. So I am not contesting the major constraint. So blood smear examination, it has got multiple advantages. It is easy to perform. We can train all the veterinarians in batches for carrying out these tests under field circumstances. They are highly economical because the cost involved is very low. It can reach the farthest area of our functional field. Widest possible reach it has got. Can be carried out effectively in the in-house laboratories. Anybody can set up a good laboratory in an expense of 1 lakh rupees and carry out these tests for the benefit of the society and the profession. Equipments and chemicals required are easily and widely available. Confirmatory in nature. If you get this organism, it is confirmed case of a particular disease condition. And it has got great potential to create livelihood for rural youth. I am emphasizing this because unless you involve rural youth, unless you train them and make them useful for yourself, you are not going to succeed because of the expense in which our clients are located. So we need to have a very good team. Only then they can bring back the test samples to you, and you can perform the test and send the reports to them. So it has got great potential, because if a person is bringing slide or a blood smear from a owner, he will be charging something. So you are creating livelihood also and helping the owner also. So what are the points to remember for taking up this peripheral blood smear examination? These are all practical points which I have felt that you must know as a veterinarian or as a pathologist, as a learning pathologist, that blood preferably should be collected before commencement of treatment. Unless if you start treatment, then you may lose out on the pathogen. Site of blood collection is ear vein or jugular vein. Both of them are equally, good. And best time for blood collection is at the peak of the fever. That you should practice. Both thick and thin blood smear should be prepared. Thick and thin blood smear should be prepared. I doubt that thick blood smear examination is a common practice in veterinary science. We must bring it into practice, because it is a very useful technique for diagnosing subclinical parasitic infestations. I mean, hemoprotozoan or hemorrhagic infection. Buffy coat examination, we are not mostly doing so. Buffy coat examination is also important in finding out subclinical or low degree of infection. All these techniques are there. The only thing is that we should have the will to apply them. And it is effective for the diagnosis of trypanosomiasis, babesiosis, and theileriosis. You just try it and you will see the difference. Blood collection at the very onset of clinical sign may give negative result due to lack of detectable parasitemia. In such cases, PCR could be extremely effective. Now, this last point is again very important, because in enthusiasm, you can take fever if there is onset of fever, and if you immediately take the blood smear, you may lose out on the pathogen, because parasitemia takes 1 or 2 days to develop. So, in my opinion, in my experience, at least after 2 days of fever, initially, whatever treatment you want to do, should do. And after 2 days of fever, there are better chances of getting parasitemia. So immediate examination, you may fail to get the result. The answer for that is that there should always be review. If your treatment, if your investigation is negative and the fever is persisting, then there is every requirement for going for second test after 2 or 3 days. Not that only one test has been done and that is enough. In medical science, we all know that if required, they are doing a review of the blood examination on daily basis, so that they can monitor their treatment or the therapeutic approach, which is missing in our profession and which is really unfortunate. So it is essential that if required, one should go for a second examination, third examination. Some more points that needs to be taken into consideration are that most hemoprotozoan parasites are located intracellular in RBC, except TRIPS, and are associated with anemia. TRIPS, we know, are extracellular parasites. A routine thin blood smear examination is therefore useful, both for assessing the erythrocyte abnormalities and detecting the presence of parasite in the RBC. So when we talk of thin blood smear, it is very essential that you know how to prepare thin blood smear. And it is an art, not much science is involved in that. So every veterinarian should be able to should know a correct way of preparing a blood smear. And I know that a lot of confusion is there in preparation of blood smear. Don't take it otherwise. You go to the textbook and find out what a good blood smear is and how it is being prepared. The another point is that once the infection becomes chronic, then peripheral blood smear may not give you good result, and you have to go for immunological diagnosis or for PCR. PCR is good for early diagnosis as well as for late diagnosis. Subclinical or latent infection serves as a source of infection for ticks, thus play important role in epidemiology and of hemoptysis infection. Now, subclinical or latent infection, if you have treated and if the organism is surviving, then it may remain as latent infection or subclinical infection for months together. And then again, there are two school of thoughts. That one says that subclinical infections are very good for immunopotentiation and for stimulation of the immune system so that body develops immunity against these pathogens. And the other says the moment immunity goes down, these pathogens can explode and produce the clinical disease. So I leave it on you, on your discretion, whether to treat subclinical infection or to leave it for the immunity to develop against these pathogens as a benefit, as a beneficial development. So it is needless to say that it is very important to have a thin blood smear, good thin blood smear for best results. It should be, we know that I'm not going to go into that. My submission is that a very good result you can get if the blood smear is good and the staining of the blood smear is good. So both these procedures must be standardized to the best possible end. We must know about the different pathogens which are prevalent in our area. Like if there is Theileria, then how it looks, and then it is annulata. You can see the ring form, and this is Theileria orientalis, which is umbrella-like, and its incidence is increasing day by day. Though the loss due to Theileria annulata in crossbred animal is 40 to 90% mortality is there. In Zebu cattle, it is only 3%, whereas losses due to Theileria orientalis in crossbred animal is only 5%. So it is not highly pathogenic, but it is definitely it is increasing its pathogenicity. Now it leads to anemia. In my personal experience, we mostly find very low degree of parasitemia in case of Theileria orientalis. It is 0.5%, 0.1 to 1%. Rarely you get 2, 3, 4% parasitemia. Then, of course, the Cox blue bodies, identification of Cox blue bodies are also very important, and the Schizons. We must be able to identify anaplasmosis, Anaplasma marginale, Anaplasma centrale, then Babesia, Bigemina, Babesia bovis, Trypanosomiasis. Morphologically, we should be able to diagnose them. So coming to the specific pathogen, what are the features of diagnosis of theileriosis? Now, it is seemingly the most And in India, the incidence of Theileria annulata, Theileria mutans, and Theileria orientalis has been reported. Theileria parva, East Coast fever, is reported more in African countries. Morphologically, it is distinguished between different species of Theileria. But of course, Theileria orientalis definitely has elongated appearance, and annulata has got ring-shaped or comma-shaped or rod-shaped appearance. So some normal identification. And by far, the incidence of Theileria annulata is highest in comparison to the other Theileria. And we know that in Bihar Veterinary College in Patna also work is going on Theileria orientalis. I have come to know, and that is very good. And though it is not considered as highly pathogenic to the cat. Apart from pyroplasmic forms in RBC, one may rarely get Cox blue bodies in lymphocytes in the cytoplasm. See, Cox blue bodies are seen in case of thaliariosis in the lymph node aspirates. OIE has said that presence of Cox blue body in the peripheral blood smear it denotes very poor prognosis. So, so identifying Cox blue body in the peripheral blood smear is rare. And the confusing point is that we should not confuse KBB with eosinophilic granules or natural killer cells. They too have granules in their cytoplasm, in the cytoplasm of the lymphocytes. So we must be very careful that we should not should not be mistaken by the presence of eosinophilic granules as Cox blue body. For detection of Cox blue body, of course, FNAC of the lymph node is more appropriate. One more thing, OIE has emphasized that it is not essential that always you will get Cox blue bodies in the superficial lymph nodes or the suprascapular or femoral lymph nodes. Sometimes the superficial lymph nodes may be negative for Cox blue bodies, and the Cox blue bodies are present in the internal lymph nodes. So that fact should be kept in mind. Another fact is that micromerozoites or merozoites, the developmental stages of thalaria, may be seen in subclinical cases, and their morphology resembles that of Thalaria orientalis. Geiger Davis book has given the picture of micromerozoites, which is very much similar to Thalaria orientalis, and of course, in such cases, PCR can play an important role in the identification of the organism. Then again, the degree of parasitemia does not correlate with the degree of anemia. There may be severe anemia and you do not find any pathogen in the peripheral blood smear, or there may be only few pathogen and there is severe disease condition in the animal. So you must take all these facts into consideration, the clinical signs and the laboratory findings, and then only correlation should be done. So understanding the morphology or having a clear-cut understanding of the morphology of the parasite is very important. Here I have shown you that Cox blue bodies are very small and very large in number, whereas natural killer cells or eosinophilic granules or lysosomal storage disease granules are much less in number and they have got a more larger size. Then of course, then we come to babesiosis. Important bovine babesiosis reported from India are Babesia bigemina, which is mostly found, and then Babesia bovis. They are large pyriform and small oval form. Here you can see that Babesia bovis can be present singly also, and here you can easily confuse it for thaliariosis. So you should be very careful for the diagnosis of babesiosis, Babesia bovis particularly. It's some of the distinguishing feature of Babesia bovis is, or babesiosis is that for detecting Babesia bovis, capillary blood from margin of the ear or tail gives better result due to sequestration. Definitely the RBC blood if you want to diagnose Babesia bovis. But for the rest of the pathogen, venous blood is good. There is no discrimination between venous blood and capillary blood. The erythrocytes which
Dr. Sanjeev, please mute all. Please mute all so that there will be no background noise.
Sir, actually, I'm not the host, sir.
Oh,
Sir, I'm asking dear sir to make me host.
okay, please.
okay. I'm sorry. So an RBC which is infected with Babesia appears darker because of the large size of the organism and the cytoplasm getting pushed in a limited space. So they appear definitely darker. And so whenever you are examining a peripheral blood smear and you find a darker erythrocyte with inclusions inside it, it is very much suggestive of babesiosis. Always remember that your classical features of babesiosis are available only in very few cases. Most of the time you get babesia which are distorted in shape, maybe due to treatment or maybe due to post immunity. They are not actually truly good morphological representation. So there may be distorted shape of babesia present in the erythrocytes, infected erythrocytes. These dark coloration of the erythrocytes are not due to deposition of any kind of pigments, as we see in case of malaria, where hemazoin pigments are deposited in babesia. Here it has hanged. So here is the example of how the erythrocytes appear darker whenever they are infected with babesia, and you can see that not always you get a very distinguished pyriform structure. Sometimes they appear like bodies inside the erythrocytes. Those things has to be taken in mind. We all know that babesia brings about intravascular hemolysis. So getting hemoglobinuria is important clinical feature that has to be kept in mind. And the color of the dung and the urine becomes yellow because of hemolytic jaundice or prehepatic jaundice. All these clinical findings has to be correlated with the laboratory findings. The significance of detecting low-grade subclinical babesiosis and early treatment of babesiosis is debatable, which I have already discussed, that whether to treat an animal which is suffering from less than 0.5% babesia or not. Some people say that one school of thought says that you should leave it, and so that inherent immunity develops in the host. And the others say that if you leave them, and in case of immunodeficiency, like in cases of transportation, etc., because the animal which are transported usually suffers from babesiosis when they are unloaded in the new destination. The stress of transportation brings about the clinical manifestation of the disease condition. Those which were, of course, latent infection at the time of purchase of the animal or at the time of loading of the animal. So these are the real facts, the real issues which has to be kept in mind before taking any decision, therapeutic decision. This is really interesting to note that America has eradicated babesiosis in 1943 by eradicating, of course, the vectors, but they are a country with very less population, so it's very difficult for us to control or eradicate babesiosis of trypanosomosis. Then we come to trypanosomosis, which is in our country, Trypanosoma evansi and Trypanosoma theileri. The theileri is a non-pathogenic trypanosoma, are prevalent. Venous blood is more suitable for diagnosis of trypanosomosis. And the chances of diagnosis are best in the first pyrexia following infection. So we miss out on that. If we do not collect blood on the first instance, then the organism becomes cryptic, and they may get located in the tissue, and we may not find these organisms in the blood smear. So it is always advisable that in the peak of the first fever, if we collect blood, the chances of diagnosis of trypanosoma is best. Later it develops cryptic nature. And as I have mentioned, 50 to 80% of trypanosomal infections are cryptic in nature. Buffy coat examination or thick blood smear examinations are considered to give better results. There are chemical examinations also for trypanosomiasis, which is a very large, robust parasite, but is non-pathogenic in nature. These are the trypanosoma events. The Buffy coat we all know. Here you have to break the capillary and take the Buffy coat, prepare a blood smear, stain it with Giemsa stain, and you will. There is more chances of getting the pathogens like trypanosoma or babesia or Theileria in these Buffy coat layers. Ion exchange, miniature ion exchange centrifugation also helps in diagnosis of trypanosomiasis, and that is again a concentration method of diagnosis. The sensitivity of different tests varies for trypanosomiasis. Buffy coat examination can detect 85 trypanosoma per ml. If there is infection is showing 85 trypanosoma per ml, Buffy coat examination can detect them. Miniature and ion exchange centrifugation, 1 trypanosoma per 2 ml can be detected. And animal inoculation can detect 1 trypanosoma in 4 ml of blood. So they are highly sensitive, animal inoculation. So the sensitivity of the test varies. Once the infection has taken place, either due to different bovine protozoan hemoprotozoan infection, they leave behind certain footprints. The presence of these morphological changes in the blood smear are a strong indicator of hemoprotozoan infection. So we have to actually look for these changes. We should be conversant with these changes, if presence of these changes are highly suggestive of presence of pathogen. If these changes are there, we should be more careful in examining the blood smear. Like erythrophagocytosis by monocyte in the peripheral blood smear, if it is present, it is suggestive of hemoprotozoan infection. Presence of spherocytes, then features of regenerative changes, especially polychromatophilia, development of basophilic stippling is more prominent in babesiosis. Degree of anemia, again, does not directly correlate with the degree of parasitemia. ऐसा नहीं है कि if an anemia is there, then definitely the hemoprotozoan infection is there. But the chances of hemoprotozoan infections are more ominous. If the patient is from. So here are some sample or pictorial depiction of what is phagocytosis. Such changes, if we see in the peripheral blood smear, is strongly suggestive of abnormal erythrocyte membrane, which has been phagocytosed by the macrophages. Presence of nucleated erythrocytes or schistocytes. Anisocytosis is there, target cells, basophilic stipplings are there, polychromatophilia. These are, when you see these changes, then mostly they are suggestive of some parasitic infestation, hemoprotozoan infection. And this is in the peripheral blood smear, you see erythrophagocytosis, and this slide shows the massive amount of erythrophagocytosis taking place in the spleen. You can see a single macrophage can ingest so many cells. So that is the reason why in the extravascular hemolysis or anemia, these are the cells which are basically responsible for bringing out anemic changes in the patient. So these are massive changes taking place in the spleen or in the extravascular zone. Presence of nucleated RBCs and the spherocytes, again, if you are able to diagnose it, if you are able to detect it, confirm it, then they are strongly suggestive of immunohemolytic anemia, which takes place due to presence of pathogen or due to immune changes. There is defect in the erythrocyte membrane, which is partially being phagocytosed by the macrophages in the spleen. So they are put into the circulation in a smaller size with more intense color because of the biconcavity of its morphology, and their presence is strongly suggestive of immunohemolytic anemia, which is the main cause of hemolysis in cases of hemoprotozoan diseases. Polychromatophilia and again suggestive of regenerative anemia. and spherocytosis. I am coming almost to the end of my discussion, and these are some of the findings we got in our 10-year study of from 2008 to 2017. And as I have shown in the first few slides, that in our case, the highest incidence of hemoprotozoan disease was seen in the rainy season in the month of August, July, August, September, October, and then there was decline, and the least amount of infection was seen in the month of November, December, and January. So the infection rate almost fell by 1/3 during these season, that is in the winter season. It was moderate in the summer season. It was highest in the rainy season. This is interesting that whatever was the number of the cases, suppose in August we got 8,000 positive cases, and in January we got 2,000 positive cases. But the proportion of infection remains the same throughout the year. That the highest proportion was of the thalaria, then followed by Anaplasma, Babesia, and the least was of the Trypanosomiasis. So the proportion doesn't change. The percentage of infection does not change, and the number of cases may go up or down. And then, of course, the latent infections are also there. We examined non-pyrexic animals for the presence of pathogen, and we found that almost 6% of the animals, non-pyrexic animal, normal animal, were suffering from, were showing presence of thalaria. Then Anaplasma was, Babesia was 1.4%, and Anaplasma 0.3%. So there is subclinical infection persisting. And the PCR test has been proved to be is very useful in that OIE says, and the other report says, that PCR is capable of detecting hemoprotozoa almost 12 to 15 days before it comes into the circulation. So doing PCR definitely is extremely important for detecting early cases of all these hemoprotozoan diseases. Only the peripheral blood smear examination will help only when the disease becomes clinical or overt. This is the significance of creating awareness in the owners. We started at 2008; it was very low, and as we provided facility, the footfall of the patient increased tremendously, and now there is very good awareness, and people are really interested in getting their animals' blood tested in cases of pyrexia. They are bringing blood samples on their own also, not waiting for the doctors to come, because the doctors are not always available. On phone, they can take advice and bring blood smear for examination. And I'm happy to say that there are many owners which are preparing beautiful smears. Once you provide them a demo that this is how you have to prepare, and they are helping other persons also in the community for preparation of blood smear and getting the things done in a proper scientific manner. So if we take pain in educating people, if we take pain in creating awareness, if we take pain in putting pressure on the administration for providing these things at the grassroots level, things can definitely change, and a lot of economic losses can be averted by proper approach. So I will end with a few points which always haunts me, and I would like you also to think over it. That are we doing enough for the farming community? We are lagging behind. You see, Corona has happened. Initially, there was RT-PCR. Now they have developed, within a year, they have developed a rapid test. Rapid test they have developed, and they are doing it. And after so many 50, 60 years, we do not have a rapid test for our disease conditions. Now, this is, so painful that despite of working for so many years, we do not have any bedside test, you can say, or on-site examination ki aapne ek bund khoon liya aur usko उस रैपिड टेस्ट में डाल करके और डायग्नोसिस कर लिया. We are failing on that front. So that is what pains me a lot that I think we are not doing enough for the farming community. We are failing somewhere. Are we not in some way responsible for this economic losses? We have to, put questions to ourselves, to the whole system, that how to overcome these things, how to make ourselves more responsible and more accountable and more useful for the society. Because unless you are useful to the society, society is not going to take note of it, take note of your profession or our profession. What is required is massive awareness program along with induction of clinical pathologists. Make them available. Veterinary professionals. Where are veterinary professionals in the field conditions? We do not have meager number. So many areas are devoid of veterinary professionals. We do not have any trained veterinary lab technicians. Everything veterinarian cannot do. They need a supporting hand. That is not there. Medical fraternity has got such a wonderful setup of laboratory investigations, and that is why they are, and they give, a lot of emphasis on that. The nursing care is there, the diagnostic facilities are, growing in number. They have got whole list of diagnostic facilities available. This is so these resource development is the need of the hour to overcome the nagging problem faced by our brethren engaged in the field veterinary practices. We are not doing enough. We are not giving enough support to the field veterinarians. Thus, the bottom line is that a huge opportunity lies for taking in the field of taking in the field of diagnostic pathology for upcoming. I request all the upcoming veterinarians, students to take up this. It's not necessarily that you should become a veterinary pathologist, but you should understand the significance of diagnostic tests for the treatment of the disease condition. We can bring a sea change in the whole setup, and all those states which are providing diagnostic facilities, they are better off than all those states where the diagnostic facilities are lacking. So with these few words, I really thank everyone for patient listening, and it was wonderful.
Thank you, sir. It was really a very good and very informative presentation, sir. We were holding our breath and listening as a film is going on, sir. It was very interesting, sir. Sir, could you hear me, sir? So he has been disconnected, some network issue. Sir, in the meantime, should we take some feedback from our participants, sir?
Yes, go ahead.
So I could see Dr. Rajiv Ranjan, who has been very consistent throughout the training. So I would request Dr. Rajiv Ranjan to please unmute himself and give feedback about this training program. Dr. Rajiv Ranjan, sir, please.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Actually, I am very pleased to inform you that